how's it going? Lauren here. I don't know why I just did that. Welcome back to my channel. I appreciate you being here. Today we are going to be doing a July wrap-up. I realize I am in fact like 4 to 5 days late, depending on what day it actually is. I haven't decided if it's the 4th or the 5th. I'm in my outdoor room and I feel like the sun is sort of penetrating the video, but you can see the water. Yay! It's the Indian River, I think. Yes. This is the second time I recorded. This is the first time I did. It took me like an honest to God 10 seconds to decide whether that was the Chesapeake or the Indian River Bay, or the Indian River outlet or inlet. So let's just get going. So July wrap up, I read 13 books. I listened to 2 and I read 11. Cool. So I discussed this book. I was reading this when I was doing my June wrap up, so naturally I finished it in July. This is Deborah Harkness's A Shadow of Night. It is the second book in her All Souls trilogy. So this one, it's not as good as the first. This one has a lot less action and a lot more information. Diana and Matthew go to 1590 in Elizabethan England. So what's cool is you do meet a ton of historical characters. You meet Marlowe, who's a real dick, by the way, Elizabeth I, you know, Sir Walter Raleigh, Shakespeare even. So it was neat in that sense because, again, Deborah Harkness just crushes the research. So there's just a ton of historical significance in the book. It's just not as fun to read. So I still love it because I just love it. 4 stars. And I'll be reading the third one, The Book of Life, probably very, very shortly while it's fresh in my brain because I don't want to lose any information. So yeah, so the second book I read was A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This was a book club choice. So my book club, Wit and Wine, yay. My mother chose it. It was her month to choose and host. I was thinking about yelling at her because this is like one of the most depressing books I've ever read, but it's also insanely beautiful. So I give it 4 stars. So the 2 women, Miriam and Layla, you know, have this like amazing friendship and they really do persevere through so much. So their strength and their love with each other and their children is something that like absolutely should be appreciated. But Rashid, their husband, is like a huge, like inexcusable, awful, bad person. The abuse is like so difficult. But the story is gorgeous, and it takes place in like, it covers like a 30-year span in Afghanistan, which is really interesting. The third book I read, drink some beer. Yeah. The third book I read was Circe by Madeline Miller. So Circe is the witch mentioned in Odysseus, or the Odyssey, I'm sorry. But of course Odysseus is the lead in Homer's The Odyssey, which I have not read yet, so I will look forward to reading it. So it's cool because this is a whole novel about a character that is like a somewhat passing moment in that epic. So it's really wonderful. She was born to the gods. I know a little bit about Greek mythology, but I don't know enough, but it still painted this really wonderful historical picture. So 4 stars. And the writing was just really clean. Really clean. The story was just a good story. Do you know what I mean? There wasn't like a ton of the authors that write just to hear themselves. It was not that. So, yay. The next book I read was Message in a Bottle by Nicholas Sparks. So this was my first Nicholas Sparks book. I had an inkling that he wouldn't be my style just because I know kind of stories he produces, and I was correct. I give it 2 out of 5 stars. It's everything you think you know about Nicholas Sparks is true. He's not an intelligent writer. I'm not saying he's not intelligent. He's just not an intelligent writer. Everything is explained. All the dialogue between characters, they all speak exactly the same. They say the most like cliche shit. You know, if it's a father, he's saying to his son, "I'm proud of you, son." You know, or if the mother's died, you know, your mother's looking down on us right now. So it's just really simple, elementary romance. And maybe this was the wrong one to start with, but it doesn't matter, it happened. And it was something that I will, you know, put out of my brain as soon as possible. 2 out of 5 stars, Nicholas Sparks. The next book was, so the next book I read was my first 1 star of the month. Oh, it's one of the worst books I've read in 2020, and it's one of the worst books I've read ever. And I actually made a whole YouTube video on how bad this book was, in my opinion. So I won't say much about it now, but just know that I despised it. Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. As you can see, it was my book of the month selection, which is also heartbreaking when you are not keen on your choice. So, just really quickly, I just thought the writing was horrendous. It was horrendous. The character development was awful. None of the characters you give a shit about, especially the lead, who's supposed to be this like kind of this heroic society girl. It takes place in Mexico, but it might as well have been anywhere. It takes place in the 1950s, but it might as well have been 2020. There's absolutely no depth to the surroundings, to the dialogue, to the anything. And the plot twist is probably one of the most ill-conceived ideas I've ever read. And I hate to say things like that, but I just was so mad because I know it's been garnering so much praise, and I really don't understand why. So, and the review that I wrote on Goodreads has gotten me more attention than any review I've ever written. Because it's true. Everything I say is true. Bang. The next book I read was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. So I appreciated the book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I've not seen the HBO show. What's interesting is like the Nicholas Sparks and the Mexican Gothic book were so overrun by detail, and I thought this one could have used a little more. So the character development, for example, the characters were interesting and twisted as hell, and I wanted to know a little bit more about them. I recommended this to one of my dear friends, and he hated it. So he just thought it was just so like mentally and like just so disturbing in the sense that it was almost ridiculous. But I actually found it pretty captivating. It's dark as hell, but I read it in legitimately like 3 hours. So yeah, again, it's dark, it's twisted. So the next book was a Audible for me. It was Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. Once again, I have not seen the Hulu show, but now I would love to. I gave it 5 stars, man. Just, there was so, if you've read it, or I guess if you've seen it, well, maybe, I don't know how close the show is to the book, but you know how many storylines are in and around that one novel, and they're all executed flawlessly. Every character is given its due. There's no unanswered questions. There's no ridiculous like answers to your questions. It just all comes together really nicely. It was just really well done. Yeah. The next book I read was the beginning of my reading rush. So I made a video about the books I was reading for Reading Rush, but this one was different than the one I said I was gonna read. Hello. Twilight by Stephanie Myers. As we all know, Midnight Sun is now out. My girlfriend picked me up a copy. Let's go. And so I've been wanting to dive back into the series in the first place. I mean, what can you say about Twilight, guys? Honestly, I was so excited. So I'm 31 now. I probably read this one, what, I was 17, 18, something like that. I was so excited to get back into this world. You know, and rightfully so. I just remember being like completely captivated by it. Of course, Team Edward all the way. I wanted to see if this would still land with me, and it kind of does. You know, the writing I knew was questionable back then, and that still stands. And unfortunately, the writing is even more glaringly bad. But joke's on me, because as soon as I was done reading it, I kind of missed being in the world. So, Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. I did not rate it, because how do you rate Twilight, man? How do you rate Twilight? Yeah. Oh, God, and Bella's still the worst. I knew it back then, and I know it even more now. Just the worst. Ugh. The next book for me was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. It's a sweet little parable, isn't it? I found myself highlighting quite a few passages, and at one point, you know, I don't even know what I wrote. It's just a book about knowing yourself, of course, like trying to discover your purpose, never giving up on that thing that drives you, which I love that, and I need to hear that always, and I'm like just hippy dippy enough. It's totally my style. So I didn't rate this either, because again, I didn't really know how to rate it. The next book was The History of Love by Nicole Krauss. This was a reread for me as well. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it's just a really sweet book. It's just well written. It's just a really nice story of characters coming together, of finding each other. It's also a book about writing in the sense that one of the characters is a writer. So I love books that are about writing or reading or bookstores, things like that. If you're interested in it, go look it up. It's pretty cute. The next book for me, and the last one from my reading rush, was The Opposite of Everyone by Jocelyn Jackson. This has been on my TBR forever, so I'm really glad I finally crossed it off. And I also really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. An interesting tale of this woman. Her name is Paula. She's like a super hardcore, like, badass bitch lawyer. And she had a really weird childhood. Her mother and her, like, traveled all around the country, like, constantly sort of... Her mother was just a crazy nomad. Not crazy in the psycho sense, just a nomad. They were always shacking up with different guys. It's just a story of, like, redemption, the power of love. Always, everything's about the power of love, right? But, like, redemption mainly. And it's cool because it blends, it takes place in Alabama, and it blends that Alabama southern, like, storytelling with ancient India. So her name is Paula. Her Christian name is Paula, but her birth name was Kali. And her brother's name is Ganesh. So it's just neat. 4 stars. The second to last book was From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty. So I know a lot of people know her. Excuse me. She's such a pop culture icon anymore. So she has her own funeral home in LA called Undertaking LA, and she has a YouTube channel called Ask a Mortician. It was just interesting because she reflects on the way American culture is not very respectful of death. We're more afraid of it, and that shows in our funeral practices. From Here to Eternity, traveling the world to find the good death, she goes around the world and examines other cultures' traditions. So we end up in Bolivia, we end up in Japan, we end up in Mexico, and then she does hit a couple of places in the US. For example, in Colorado, there is, I believe it's like the only legal pyre. So she witnesses, you know, a body burning, and just the spirituality that's surrounding that. She's a fine writer, very approachable, very down to earth, very informative, really, you know, quirky. So I liked it. And again, it's a nonfiction, so I learned something. Bang. The last book I listened to was the second 1-star of my month, A Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. So the friend who I recommended Sharp Objects to and absolutely despised it recommended this to me, but of course I did the audio. And I think, and I'm sure we all agree, that the audio totally affects your experience. And unfortunately, this was ruined for me. The narrator was an absolute horror. So the character, Anna, is an agoraphobic, alcoholic, ex-child psychologist with like so many issues, and she just willy-nilly takes her medication and then drinks like 6 bottles of wine. So she already has so many issues that she's essentially a caricature. And the narrator was just like this breathy, panicky, like just awful person the entire time. It was awful. It was so undeniably bad, I can't even go on about it. The writing wasn't great. There was so much talk of like the amount of alcohol she consumed, about her like unhygienic behavior. The classic movies were a really big theme throughout it, so I guess it's very, I haven't seen these movies, but I guess it's very Rear Window. It's a very Hitchcockian inspired novel, but there were so many just like references to old movies and dialogue from old movies that it just dragged on. Awful. 1 star. And it turns out A.J. Finn, the author, is a pseudonym for another guy. I don't know his real name, but I guess he's actually not a very good person. Yeah, so I don't feel bad about despising his work of literature. That's it. Those are my 13 books. Thank you for tuning in. Currently I am reading, I have like 10 pages left in the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. I put it down for a while, of course, because of the reading rush, but I was starting to really like plow through it because I knew it was just something I needed to do. I needed to finish it. But I would get like, you know, you read 15, 20 pages and I was just mortally depressed. So I've taken a second. I've taken a breather on that. And then I'm also reading The Last Piece by Imogen Clark. So this is my first month doing Once Upon a Book Club box, which is adorable. So if you don't know the concept, it is, they give you a book and then every like 50 pages or so, you open and you see this, and then whatever page number it's on, the present says page 47. So you open that. And it's really cool because it just directly correlates with what you just read. It's just a cute, like, everyone's going through something and the author explores all their issues. A lot of it does have to do with family and motherhood. So, yeah. Yeah. And I would never pick a book like this up. And it's adorable. It's not going to change my life, but it comes with presents. That's all I need ever. So that's it. That's the video. Thanks for being here. I will talk to you guys soon. I know life has not necessarily gotten easier, so just hang in there. We're all in it together. Wear your mask, wash your hands, keep hope. We'll get through it. So, all right. See you later.